text, but we're just going to read verses 1 through 5 to start with. Proverbs 19, verse 1. Better is the poor that walketh in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Also that the soul be without knowledge, it is not good. And he that hasteth with his feet sinneth. That perverteth his way, and his heart fretteth against the Lord. Wealth maketh many friends, but the poor is separated from his neighbor. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. This morning we're continuing again our trek through Proverbs. Last week we looked in Proverbs 18. This week moving into Proverbs 19. And we're going to be looking at basically the whole chapter. And as the whole chapter unfolds, it's again talking about more tidbits of wisdom. The first few verses talk specifically about the marks of a foolish or a stupid man. And then he moves further into more marks of wisdom as we go through. Solomon's is basically his expose on the fool. We've already seen that a fool can be counted the same as a stupid man. In fact, the Bible describes it as being brutish, which you look up the word, simple definition, stupid. It was just an older word for the word that we now use called stupid. Now, people don't like that word, and it's a mean word. If applied correctly, it has its place. You know, it's thoroughly overused. Just like the word fool is thoroughly overused, if people understand the true meaning of it, it does have application. And at the same time, when it's used, it is a harsh word, and it is meant to be degrading because it's supposed to make you to realize where you are. But the word stupid is a very strong word, but the Bible doesn't use it flippantly. It uses it pointedly and with accuracy as it describes the difference in these people. It goes through and breaks down the difference again between the wise and the fool. And here, as we look further into these comparisons, we're going to see that contrast again between the actions of the wise and the actions of the fool. We have to remember that throughout Proverbs, there are tidbits of that are meant to be applied to everyday living. Pastor is the one that got me started on reading a proverb every single morning as my morning starter. You know, it's not necessarily the only thing you read every day, but it's just your starter to get you started on thinking on things of the day. And the benefit of it is, although it seems like every verse is not connected, although in some cases they do seem like they're totally scattered, I guess the best way to describe it, and I've used this before, it's like taking out a shotgun of truth and just firing it at you. Instead of just hitting on just one thought, he's able to cover a bunch of thoughts at once. And to be honest, there's times, if you'll notice, if you read it every single day, you'll read Proverbs chapter 19 on the 19th of this month, and you'll get something out of it that you didn't get something out of it last month. And then the next month, a verse that you read last month and you just glanced over will come out to you that next month, because there's so much contrast. It's amazing how you'll find stuff that'll just hit you because of what's going on in your life. And so it's a very useful section. And as he goes through again, he was trying to teach his son Rehoboam, and he was trying to teach him basically all he could of his wisdom. In one section, he wanted to be able to pour out all of his wisdom because he knew, first of all, his son was not wise. He was a fool. Second of all, he knew he wasn't going to be around forever, and he wanted to leave something behind for him to listen. Some bit of wisdom for his son to listen from. They even compiled in some of the teachings of his mother, some of the teachings of others that had learned from him. He wanted a bit of wisdom he could, compile it together and hope that his son would learn. Now we know his son never did, but that doesn't mean that we can't be the beneficiaries of the wisdom. So as we look here, we see that, how much better would it be concerning teaching if parents would much about teaching their children wisdom as they do about teaching them how to earn $1. If parents would worry as much about teaching their children wisdom as they do about teaching them how to play their favorite sport. If they worried about as much about teaching them wisdom as they do about teaching them about sexual orientation. I mean, the truth is, there's so many parents in today's society worry more about than teaching their child to be wise. And as a result, we have a nation run by fools, served by fools, and full of fools. And the fact is, it sounds like a terrible, mean accusation to make, but you look at the book of Proverbs, and if you pull the comparisons, you'll find that there are many fools living within our midst. as this section goes through and makes the comparison, our society, you see that our society really has misplaced priorities. We've given birth to a generation that has all the markings of a brutish or a stupid man. We live in a generation that despises any form of correction, any form of reproof, any form of disagreement. They don't want it. Now, that doesn't mean they're not okay with disagreement. They're okay with disagreeing with you. Just don't disagree with them.
Right.
You know, we live in a generation that you can lift up your voice and declare everyone who doesn't believe in homosexual marriage a bigot. But if I say that I don't believe in it, then I'm wrong. I can't condemn you, but you can sure condemn me. You know, it's very funny how that's become such a one-way road. I wrote a post about that on Facebook a while back, saying how tolerance is a sword, but yet everyone uses it as a one-way road. It only goes one way. It always goes away from me to you. You have to get on my road and follow my path. I don't have to follow yours, and I don't even have to listen to yours. But again, that's become the nation that does not want to be corrected. In fact, if you do correct it, the only Bible word that they sure do love is judge not. You know, it's amazing. None of them have read it. None of them care for it very much, but they know judge not. And they immediately want to throw that up. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. Again, our world hates being corrected. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 11, the Bible states, there is a generation that are pure in their own eyes, and yet is not washed from their filthiness. They look around and they go, we are the greatest generation that ever lived. We know better than all the generations that have come before us. We're smarter than them. You sit there and look at even those that mock the very Constitution with which we follow. I've read people who have said, those people were hundreds of years ago, we know better than them now. I'm sorry, you don't. Just because they lived hundreds of years ago does not mean they were not intelligent. If you look at the writing of the way they did things, they thought through things quite a bit better than I think people do now. I would say that someone would look at them and make the same proclamation that Paul made, saying, much study hath made thee mad. That because you've got Wikipedia and Google, that you're smarter than every generation that's lived before you. If that's the case, you know, how come we can't build a wall to keep illegal immigrants out, but 1,800 years ago China figured it out. 1,800 years ago they built a wall to keep them out. So, you know, I hate to say it, but 1,800 years ago they were better at something than we were today. So time alone is not a judge of whether someone was wise or not, but yet our generation is proven to think that they're wiser than every generation that's come before them. They think they've got it all figured out, but as the Bible states, they are not washed from their own filthiness.
Yes, at the time that our legislation, our Constitution being drafted, many of these people you're talking about, their homes were burned,
oh, yeah.
Their barns were burned, businesses wrecked, and what they believed.
Yeah, they were willing to die for what they believed.
And the Bible tells us not to move the landmarks.
Yeah.
Every generation moves a little further
Oh, yeah.
away from what they're supposed to be. And right now we have no landmarks.
No, yeah, we don't anymore. Yeah, so we have no borders anymore. Everything's open. Everything, and literally the border is included. But there is no landmarks anymore. We've picked it up and pushed it down the road so many times it's wore down to nothing. And say now all we do is, and before you looked at the Old Testament when they'd walk by, what is that? Well, that's the altar we used to worship at. Now they walk by and say, what is that? And they say, oh, that's what a bunch of old fools used to do. You know, that's become our nation. And as he describes this difference between the wise and the fool, he's going to, first of all, we're going to see the marks of the stupid or the foolish man in verses 1 through 5. First of all, in verse 1, we see that the stupid or the foolish person is foolish in their words. He said, better is the poor that walketh in his integrity than is a fool. So he said, an honest poor person and a rich liar. I think we all know that. None of us in here are wealthy, and I have nothing against the wealthy. It would be nice to not have to worry about finances. I think most of us agree the fact that they buy happiness, but it sure makes misery more comfortable. You know, the truth is, if our heirs, hopefully it wouldn't change our opinion, but it seems to be that people of wealth think that they've at which accountability is no longer important. It's no longer important to them anymore. But the Bible said that an honest poor man is far better than a rich liar. He said that we're to be honest in our life. Again, better is the poor that walketh in his. He said, you are better to be penniless when you die, but have integrity, than to die with the largest bank account that anyone has ever had and be known for being a liar. It makes you think of the comparison between the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus had nothing to his name when he died, but yet he enjoyed the rewards of being in heaven, of being in paradise at that time. But yet the rich man, who had everything he could have at his fingertips, lived as a fool, and in the end he received his reward. So we have to be honest in our life. In fact, in 22:1, rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. Now the rich people would say that, the rich fools would say, oh yeah, it's easy to say because you're poor. Of course, you got to make yourself feel better about where you are. Now, first of all, I don't think any of us in here are truly poor. I don't think we really know what the country and seeing what real poverty looks like. Poverty is not having access to an Obama phone and having food stamps and having all these different things. We don't know true poverty. True poverty is when your kids, because they have no clothes, when your house is made, and when you drink water that's also used as bathroom water by other people because it's all you've got. But he said, you're better off to live in squalor and be a person of integrity, or to live in a mansion and have everything you could desire and yet be a fool and be a liar. It's better to die with a good name than to die with a good bank account, basically, is the way the modern version that would be. He tells us that we're also to be truthful with our lips. He said in the second half there, he said, better is the poor that walketh in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. So he said, wise is truthful, while the fool utters slanders, utters perverse things. Be truthful with our lips. It simply means, when you talk, it ought to be true. People ought to know that they can count on what you have to say. When they come to you for advice, you come into a bunch of money and you try to go find an investment agent. I imagine it would be, I've never come into a bunch of money, so it's not an issue for me. But I would imagine it would be hard to make sure you find someone that has your best interest at heart. Their best interest in heart. The simplest version, I guess, for today is when you try to find somebody that's a insurance agent. Enough here recently from changing insurance, you realize that typically a salesperson pushes to you what's best beneficial. It's hard to find someone that has integrity, that looks out for you, that cares for you, and that when they tell you something, you know it's true. You know on it. That's why they said it's always, if you can move into a city and find a good doctor and find a good mechanic, you're doing pretty good. Because it's hard to find people that tell the truth. You have to be willing to mean what you. Matthew chapter 5:7. You don't have to necessarily. In Matthew 5:30, the Bible says this. He said, "But let your communication be yea, yea, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil." You can't help politics. You just can't help but think of it. I won't dive deep into it, but how many politicians trust when they say this is, and then you find out, no, it's not what it is. And then the answer is, I misspoke. No, it's called lying. Misspoke is such a nice thing. I lied to you and you caught me. Our politicians, like I said, have become career politicians. I can't even remember the name of this woman. Much about her. I've watched a couple of her speeches. It begins with a C, if I remember correctly. I saw it in The View as a bunch of extremely liberal women, but she held her own pretty well. She's running for a Republican ticket, and I don't know how much attention she's going to get, but I enjoyed watching her. And someone asked her, said, "Why do you have the right to try to go for presidency when you've got no history behind you? You've never held any office." And she went through and she just basically. It's very interesting, but our original founders of this country imagined a country run by citizen leadership, not by professionals. And that's what we've got, is a bunch of professional liars. But you have to be willing to mean what you say and say what you mean. Lies really always have a home to roost. Verse 5 said, "A false shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape." They can think it. They can think, I covered it up good enough. And the truth is, you could die with a secret, but it doesn't mean with it. Doesn't mean it's covered up. It will always be uncovered, whether it be after your death here on earth or whether it be after your death standing before God's judgment. There's no secrets before Him. It's been said before, truth that is squashed to the ground has a way of taking root and springing up again. You know, it's amazing. You can take that and squish it down and think that nobody saw it, and all you're seeds for it to regrow. And that's the truth. I think most of us know that even as kids, we thought we had gotten away with something. We thought we'd hidden the evidence. And then all of a sudden, there is something hidden away, and it's like God finds a way of making it revealed. You know, it's just amazing how those things happen. I know my wife was telling me about a guy. She has a lot of Facebook friends and groups that she talks in, and her husband he apparently had an iPhone. It had a linked message account, and it had an iPad. And one day she had to use it and was going through and found messages from another woman. And she goes through that and sits there and goes, you know, he's got a meeting, and then she pulls it up and keeps it aside now that she's looked at it and noticed something. He's not supposed to be in work till 10 in the morning, and a text shows up, and she reads and says, meet in the usual place, and he tells his wife, I've got to go. They called me into work early. Calls work, and he didn't show up full time. He thought he'd gotten away with it. Smart. But it's amazing how lies have a way of out. Now, it's very sad for that woman. I don't know her name. You know, hope that she's saved and hope the Lord can help her. That's proof right there. You think you got it figured out, and you think you've outsmarted everybody. You ought to. So we see that first of all in verse 1, the fool is foolish in their words. Second of all, they are foolish in their walk. He said, also that the soul be without knowledge, it is not good, and he that hasteth with his feet sinneth. Ignorance is dangerous. Ignorance is not bliss. I think after I grasped the danger of ignorance more than I ever have before. I hate to keep going off on this, but it's all my mind has been thinking about. It's very frustrating to see the direction of our country. I don't know how many of you were taught this. I grew up north. I was taught that Civil War was slavery. That's what I was taught. So I imagined in the South, which was a bunch of racists. And I thought that until the day I came here. That's exactly what I believed, because that's what I was taught. I come down here and I start to realize, after to really notice this, that the fact that it wasn't really the way I was taught. In fact, I go back and look, I see that it's interesting, just the timeline alone, that the war began in 1861, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't take place till 1863, and it only applied to the southern states. So if it really was about that, why didn't it apply to everyone before? I mention that because now it's been proposed that Confederate flag is a flag of racism. I sit there and look at it now from my perspective, and I said the flag didn't stand for that. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with freedom of the states, wanting to be free from it, right back to where we started, back where the war was. But I look at it, and my wife looked at me and said, what were you taught? I thought, she's right. I would have been that side to go to battle to protect the state in a way that northern people would feel right now. And it makes that clear. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is dangerous. There are those who say it's bliss. However, the Bible states that it's dangerous, even deadly. In fact, a good illustration of that is found in Joshua chapter 9. In Joshua chapter 9, you find Joshua's inheriting this new land. He's fighting new battles. And the Gibeonites can go, they're getting awfully close to us. I tell you what, we need to find a way to make a league with them so they kill us, because they're wiping everybody out. So they sit down and they get smart ideas and say, okay, let's do this. Let's take some wineskins that are old and fill it with wine. Let's take some shoes that are old and wore out and some clothes that are just tatty and ready to be thrown out. Let's put all this stuff and let's in a band and pretend like we've come from a long journey. From so far away, we're nowhere near the land we possess, and then make them make a covenant between us. Now, obviously, desire was to protect their people, and I can't really blame them for coming up with a scheme like this. But the problem was that Joshua didn't go to God first. He allowed himself to remain ignorant and made a choice without seeking intervention and wisdom from God. Because if he'd asked, God would have said don't. But he didn't. He made himself, and in the end it would change the face of Israel, because they would deal with the Gibeonites from then on, when they should have never had to have dealt with them. So the issue was simply because he was ignorant, and ignorance was not bliss. It affected their nation.
Yeah, I went to the reference scripture on the second verse, and Hosea 4:6. In the first half of it says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will supply."
That's a perfect reference point. He said they've chosen ignorance, and ignorance will destroy them. That's our country, guys. That's America. We've chosen ignorance, and the people who choose it are shouting louder than anyone else. Have you ever had an argument when someone is wrong, they get louder? When they know they have no point to prove, they get angrier. When they know they have no evidence to back their opinion, they start shouting even louder and being willing to fight. Why? Because if you cannot back your opinion, but you hold it nonetheless, the option you have to do is to get angry that someone disagrees. And that's why you don't find standing up angry, wanting to burn down buildings and start riots, because when you're right, you don't have to be angry. You can just be right. You have to be angry because of no other basis. You're in an argument with someone and they know the only thing they can do is shout loud enough to the danger. So we see that he's foolish in his walk because of his ignorance, because of the disappointment of that ignorance. We saw he said, "He that the soul be without knowledge is not good, and he that hasteth with his feet sinneth." He that is basically without wisdom will make choices that result in sin in their own life. The disappointment of that is found in chapter 18 and verse 13. He said, "He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is a folly and shame unto him." Same thing. If you're ignorant of the facts, if you're ignorant of the truth, he said you'll make foolish choices. Jumping to conclusions with incomplete information can be and have we not seen enough of that in the news here recently? All we do is shoot one headline, and instantly the whole nation is ready to go to war. And I don't mean war with another nation, war within our. And it's because an innocent, unarmed person was killed, and yet when the evidence pours out, there was no guilt to be laid except for against the person who lost their life. Now, is it true instances of overreaching power within police? Absolutely. Are there instances of overreaching power within our government? Sure, but they don't get arrested. They get promoted for presidency, in fact. We found out you get to watch men die and then get to run for president, or you get to be current president and nothing happens to you. I think our country greatly owes an apology to the Nixon family. Very, very small mistake made there, and we've got a lot bigger ones, and yet they still stay in presidency. But the disappointment is the fact that jumping to conclusions becomes harmful and disappointing. How many people have brought sorrow and disappointment on themselves? They become ignorant of God's will. And instead they make choices that they claim is the will of God, but they have no clue because they're them. Did you pray about this? And they'll say, "Sure did. Oh, I prayed about it." God gave them to scripture after scripture after scripture showing that what they're doing is not right, but they will still stand and say, "I'm doing God's will." And you go, "No, you're not." Ignorance. It's destroyed the life of many people. Our desire is to please Him. How can we know what pleases God if we're ignorant of His Word? It's impossible. You can't know it. Just like the Bible says, it's impossible. Without faith, it's impossible to please Him. How do you know what's pleasing to Him if you don't read His Word? So we saw first of all that the fool is foolish in his words. Thirdly, foolish in his ways. Has a perverted walk. In verse 3, the foolishness of man, pervert means to overthrow. It carries the idea of his own life. He said a foolish person that's perverted in their way, they essentially light the dynamite in their own house. I mean, I've worked with this before, and actually here recently, you just look at the person and you don't understand how good you have it in your current position, but yet they light their own house. You know, it's like the saying goes, they bite their, what is it, what is it? Well, I'm thinking of the one, bite your own nose off to spite your face. Yeah, that's essentially what they're doing. And you say, how foolish is that? Again, a person who is perverted in their life, they overthrow themselves. They are the destruction. They also, when they're destroyed, they blame themselves. They blame God. He said, "The of man perverteth his ways, and his heart fretteth against the Lord." Kind of like the child that does wrong, you for correcting them. It's like the employee that does something that you told them not to do and then gets angry at you for correcting. You know, in truth, you tell them that what you're doing is going to end in failure. They get mad at you for correcting. It does end in failure, and you try to instruct them further from there. They get mad at you again for bringing it up. You know, they pervert their life. Instead of blaming themselves, they blame someone else specifically. In fact, that's life principle number 78. Fools blame God. You look at the thieves on the cross. There's two men on the cross, but not listening or mocking them. But then the one sat there and said, "No, there's something not right here. This man's different." And the other man calls out and said, "If you're really God, get all of us off the cross." And the second man said, "No, you and I are here justly. We deserve the punishment we're getting. This man did nothing." He saw and looked at it, and yet this man sits there and says, "I've done all these crimes. I deserve to be where I am, but God, you need to fix this. God, you need to fix my problems." And the other man said, "No, we got ourselves here." That's the difference in the world. Two perfect illustrations of how people handle correction. Blamed God and fix me, and the other one.
In recent years, when I try to witness to somebody on an issue like what you're talking about, they're not really listening to me. They're thinking about how they're going to respond
Oh, yeah.
to what I'm saying. I mean, they want to come back with their own viewpoint. They're not even hearing what I say. Come on, how can I stop this? How can I do it?
The art of conversation is a dying art.
Yeah.
It's a very dying art.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. And I'm not going to say figured out, but I feel like I'm getting wiser in my age. I'm starting to realize like you said, I mean, I've learned that just in the time I've been here in the past 10 years, that it's important to listen and then respond.
Right.
But, you know, a fool person, again, they blame God for their own mistakes. It's never their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And we see, fourthly, in verse 4, that they are foolish in their worth because they have the wrong values. Wealth maketh many friends, but the poor is separated from his neighbor, because the fact is we place value on things in this world. But those things, you lose those that care about you too, because you benefit them. How many stories if you sums of money and friends start there, and then when you're down, can't find a one of them. Makes you think of the story of the prodigal son. Comes into a money, he goes off, and it said that he partied essentially all of his money. He didn't party by himself. Notice that. He didn't party by himself. Spending all this money, everyone goes, "No, I don't know you. We don't know each other." It's just all of a sudden when someone comes on the house, everyone knows you. "Oh, buddy, pal, how you doing?" Money ran out. No one said, "Hey, come on, stay at my house. I'll get you a job. I'll give you." Who are you? I don't know you. You know, our country hasn't changed. It's still the same. You get heard when you're big and important. It even happens if you've got a church and going and huge, and it's got a big. Everyone wants to hear you speak. But if you come from a church of meager means and meager size, you're never going to get called to a big audience to speak. Never. It's not going to happen. But you know, the person that values things in this world, when they lose those things, friends right along. The marks of our life are determined, again, by the book of Proverbs, by wisdom and foolishness. Now we're going to move quickly to finish the last section here, but we're going to move into this second half. And as we're looking here, as we've been pushing our way through these 18 chapters, we have to, again, measure our definition of why, whether we're or a fool. It's not a difference between saved and unsaved, but wise and this passage will move further into looking into the integrity and the acknowledgement of verses 1 through 4, specifically at showing that integrity is greater than riches, because again he said the poor is better than the rich when it comes to the poor that has and the rich that's a liar. In fact, he uses 4 times in this chapter the word poor and 142 times in the whole Bible. And we understand that aspiring to being poor. There's no one that aspires to that. But yet Proverbs 19:1 states that if you are a poor man with integrity, you're better than a rich, crooked person. He said, so being poor is not a sin. Being poor is not necessarily a bad thing as long as you retain integrity. In fact, it tells us that the pursuit of riches will always lead to heartache and improper values. 1 Timothy chapter 6. I can go there real quick. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verses 6 through 10. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Brought nothing into this world, and is certain we carry nothing out. We, having food and raiment, let us be there with content. But they rich fall into temptation and into many foolish and which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves. Think of the difference. The 2 offerings in the early church. You had the one where the man sold his land, gave all out of a pure heart, and then you had Ananias and Sapphira that looked at it and said, man, they got a lot of glory out of that. Let's buy a piece of land, and then it sells for more than they anticipate and go, ooh, that's a lot of money. I don't think I can give quite that much. Let's hold it back, but we told everyone we'd give it all, so let's just don't say anything. Now I imagine when they came in to make their offering and put it in the plate, they didn't go screaming, hey, we're bringing it all. They'd already made that promise. Just wanted to keep quiet that wasn't all. Came in and just kind of quietly went and kind of walked away. And that's where he caught him there and said, whoa, was that all? And it wasn't that they even had to give all. He even said that. They should have just came and said, all we got. We ended up getting a little bit more, but here we want to be a blessing with what we do want to give. But again, riches piercing through with many sorrows cost their lives. So integrity is greater than riches. In verses 5 through 9, liars are exposed. Twice in 5 verses, Solomon warns of lying, because he makes it clear that liars will not be a part of heaven. In Revelation 21:8, he goes through and gives that list of idolaters, of all the people who will not be found in heaven. That doesn't mean the fact that you lose your salvation. We understand that. It's the fact that someone who makes a life of lying is not a person who's saved, because the Holy Spirit will convict you, and therefore you're not a part of going to heaven. And at the same time, if you're in heaven, you'll be in your perfect body, and you will not be a liar in heaven, because liars, in verse 5, will not escape. A false witness shall not be unpunished. Verse 9, a false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall perish. So he tells us that lies will be exposed and will not be a part of heaven. He tells us also that liars are contrary to sound doctrine. And Timothy was motivated to impress. In verses 6 through 7, he said, entreat the favor of the prince, and every man is a friend to him that giveth gifts. All the brethren of the poor do hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursueth them with words, yet they are wanting to him. He said they make their decisions on who they're going to be friends with and who they're going to spend time with based on the benefit of what they can get out of them. We have to teach children and teach our family and friends that honesty and integrity and are to be valued in our lives. Teach them that to be always truthful is right in the eyes of God. Our government's current policy of not being honest about defining terrorism is going to destroy our own country. We work hard to teach the fact that the Muslim religion itself is a peaceful religion. Not. It is not. By the very definition of their Quran, it's not. We stand here and say, as a man killed 4 Marines just this past conclusions. He was alone acting. He was a lone gunman. You know, you've moved from the part of foolishness to moving to the part of purely trying to deceive the country. Again, I love our country, but I think our current president is purposely trying to deceive on the dangers of Muslims as he them then by the busload into our country. He's trying to walk our country down with Muslims. Personally, I believe he is, and I know people argue that and say, oh, that's the typical conservative standpoint. No, I think he's proven it. But you look at this and says, don't jump to conclusions. He was just a lone acting gunman. Doesn't matter the fact that a known ISIS account text moments before the shootings, hashtag Chattanooga, it's coming your way, essentially. The fact that they took claim for but he was a lone wolf, lone gunman. But yet, again, our government teaching, it doesn't believe in honesty and integrity, and it will be to our own destruction. If you don't explain the real dangers of something, you're likely to see someone get hurt by it. If I just tell my kids, there's a neighbor's dog that's vicious, and I just look at him, I say, kids, now just stay out of their backyard. Well, why? It's just not good. Well, why is it not good? Just don't. You know, eventually they're going to sit there and go, why is it not good? Let me go see. If I tell them, boys, there's a dog in that backyard, and this is a good reference because in the neighbor's yard that I would not want my kids near. There's dogs in the backyard that they bark and they sound like they'd hurt you. If you go over that fence, if they don't know you, there's a decent chance they will bite you, and they might even possibly take your life. Do not go over. I've warned them the consequences. Then if they make the choice, they did it full knowing the consequences. But again, we live in a country that doesn't want to about things. They'd prefer to lie about things to make people feel better about the destruction around them. They'd sit there and I don't know if you've I'm trying to remember the name of the movie. It was a little kids movie. Oh, I can't remember now. But they cut down all the trees. They live in a town called Sneedville, and it was basically a environmental push anyway about why not to cut down trees. But the point I'm getting at is they lived inside a city that had really tall walls. They had like 40-foot walls. And inside the city, everything was beautiful. Everything was pretty. Everything was shiny. But when one of the boys that got adventurous found a way to exit the wall and go through one of the outside, he looked and everything was just a wasteland. It was destroyed. But yet when he stepped back inside, everything was pretty and shiny and new. Why? Because they put up these walls to lie to make people feel more comfortable about their surroundings, and that's again what our country has done. We see that wise people know their anger in verses 11 through 14. The discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression. Because wise people know one of the greatest strengths you can have is being willing to control yourself. You know, the Bible even says that able to control himself and his own emotions. He said it's essentially like a city with walls. You're easily destroyed because you have no defenses. If you're a person that's quick to anger, what you do is come up and just tap you on the shoulder and you're ready to blow up. You're ready to take a man's life over tapping someone on the shoulder. I remember seeing a video online where a motorcyclist, in some states this is legal to cut between cars to do this lane splitting. He lane split and they came up to a light. He was waiting at the light and the guy behind him was drunk driving. Got angry the fact that he lane split and got out of the car and started. Now luckily he was so messed up and so inebriated the other man just basically only had to push him over. This happened simply because it got a drunk man off the street. But that was a man that didn't even take just a to go to fighting, because he was a man that had no control over his own anger. Verses 18 through 20 he tells us, chasten thy son while there is hope, let not thy soul spare for his crying. A man of great wrath shall suffer for him, yet thou must do it again. Hear counsel and receive instruction. Be wise in thy latter end. He said, son, don't be quick to get angry. He said, because a man of wrath will have to keep getting swooped out of the fire. A guy that goes around looking for a fight's always going to find one, and he's usually going to get in deeper than he can handle. And if his buddies have to keep saving him, they're going to finally get tired of saving him. He said, son, just don't be that person. Don't be an angry person. Proverbs chapter 22 and verses 24 through 25, he said this. He said, friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man thou shalt not go. Let his ways and get a snare to thy soul. Should you learn not to have a quick anger, but don't become friends with those that are, because you'll learn from them. That a wise person knows how to control their own anger. Also, do not provoke those that are in authority. In verses 12 through 14, he said, the king's wrath is as favor as dew upon the grass. Essentially, sons that are in authority. You know, if you have a boss they're too much for working for, until you can find another job, don't go around poking him in the eye with a stick. It's just not a good idea. I worked for a boss that I did not have much respect for. I never desire to work for that person ever again. I will if I have to. He's about to starve, and that was the only job. I would take it again just to feed. I don't ever want to work for that person again. But I was angry with the way they treated me. But I did not walk in and say, I quit, I'm done. You're terrible, and left out the door, because I didn't have another job to go to. So I stayed there and worked under that person, controlled my own emotions, my own desire to pick up a club and club them upside the head until I could go to another place to make sure my family was successful. But he doesn't do that. A fool's the person that gets angry and they don't care what it costs. Even if it costs themselves, they don't care. They're willing to get angry at their boss, at their spouse, regardless of the consequences. Even be mad at God. Consequences. So we see that wise people know how to control their anger. We also see in verses 15 and 24 that laziness is not a virtue. In verse slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. Verse 24, a slothful man hideth his hand in his bosom, and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. They're a person that they don't just want you to make sure they have food in the house. They want you to make the tomb. He said they're so lazy they don't even want to have to bring their hand to their mouth. That brings us to life principle 79. Lazy people, because they won't work. They don't want to. You know, I've seen in our country, it was started by essentially, I have to remember what was the president. Roosevelt, I want to say it was. What was it? Roosevelt that started it. Essentially put in place, and I read an article that was extremely good by Alan West. I don't know if you ever read any of his. He's got some pretty good stuff. And I read an article by him, why we have such a state. 2 punches, he destroyed the family in America. He came in and told women, you can get pregnant and not have to have any accountability for it. And then he told them, keep men out of your house. If you have a man in the house, you can't qualify for these benefits. Programs. So he essentially said, sleep around and get pregnant, no consequences, and 2, make sure a man doesn't stay permanently in your home. And he was basically, his whole point was showing the black family was not the Republicans' problem. It actually was a Democrat issue, he said, because the Democrats were the ones that put these policies in plan. And again, regardless, if you looked before these programs, 81% of all black children were born to a mother and a father that were living together. But now the number is down to something like, I want to say 28% or less. I can't remember. They say it's about 28%. You know, he went through and gave these examples, said that, well, destruction of the black family. If you're in Thessalonians, you shouldn't eat. Wise people, foolish people also, they all you know, they list off that it's too cold, it's too hot, there's a line in the be eaten. Like I said at the time, wise people listen and learn. Verse 25, smite a scorner and the simple will beware, and reprove one that hath understanding, he will knowledge. Brings us to life principle number 80, wise people listen and learn. 4, that you live and you learn. Not everybody does that. In fact, it's a very small percentage of people that live and learn. I feel like I every day that make over and over and over, and you just go, don't you get tired of hitting your head against that wall? Something different. But he said, wise people listen and they learn. It's been said before that a smart will learn from his own mistakes. A wise man will learn from the mistakes of others, but a foolish person learns from mistakes. You know, that is the definition of wisdom. Well, the bell is time for us to finish. Let's go ahead and Lord, I do pray for those that are in our country. I pray that you would help our country to go. It doesn't have to be their choice, Lord, but they would at least learn to use wisdom and common sense when looking into issues. I pray that you'd help our country to get back to God. Help us to see revival in our country. Lord, help us see revival in our churches. I pray that you'd help to being wise in our decisions. Lord, that we would judge ourselves by what the book of Proverbs determines to be a wise person. Help us of our emotions. Have integrity with our business decisions and the way we treat people. Lord, in your name I pray. Amen.